gentlemen, welcome to the future. My name is Zach Gardner, and about 3 to 4 months ago, I set off on a little bit of a journey. I wanted to find people that were thinking about generative AI as much or potentially more than I am. I wanted to go out and find people that had really strong opinions, which, I don't shy away from strong opinions. Even if we don't agree with everything, what I'm really looking for is just a really broad perspective on where generative AI is, where it's going, are some of the things that people are seeing that are good about it, maybe what are some of the things that we kind of need to shy away from, things that we really need to be worried about. I'm interviewing people from defense to healthcare, banking to finance, and today I am joined by Michael Eichenseer, the AR/VR coordinator, if I recall correctly, at UMKC. Booyakasha. I remember these
That's
things. How's
correct.
it going, Michael? How's it hanging?
It's good. It's good. AI's taking our jobs, man.
Yeah, we'll see about that. We'll talk about that. So before we get started, just a quick note. All views and opinions expressed in this program are explicitly the views and opinions of participants and not reflective of their employer or any trade organizations they are affiliated with. And now we can start talking about the fun stuff. So,
Awesome.
so Michael, I guess to get us kicked off, you as someone that works, the coordinator at UMKC, like you're thinking about the next generation, like the people that have maybe a little bit less gray hair than you and I do. What are some of the things as it relates to generative AI that you're excited about, that you're hopeful for the next generation of developers that they can take advantage of? And maybe what are some of the things that worry you about it? Give me your
Yeah, I
thoughts.
think I think generative AI is what Google was to us, right? We were super powered versus the people who programmed a decade before we came along, because we had Google. Most people's first jobs out of college the last 20 years has been Googling, right? Especially in the computer science field. Um, ChatGPT, generative AI, these tools, as far as programmers are concerned, are Google on steroids, legal steroids currently. And it's amazing, right? So you can now, when you're trying to Google something, you get into those holes where you can't figure out what to Google. Well, that's what GPTs are fixing right now. They can help you figure out what to search for. Um, so I definitely see it as a tool that every young person needs to be using. Absolutely. We'll see how things play out legally or whatever, but absolutely you should be using these tools just the same way we had to use Google, right? You're doing yourself a disservice not using them for sure. Um, my only like major worries kind of stem from the idea that because the tool's so easy to use, you could make the argument that, oh, there's not as much reason to learn the low level stuff, right? Why does it work? How does it work? But this has been true every generation, right? We know less about how a house is built than our parents knew, than their parents knew, and their parents literally had to build the houses themselves, right? Um, and yet society still functions even though we might not know how to build a house, or some of us either. Anyway, I think it's the same in software. There are downsides, right? There's of all this. I mean, look at operating systems. There's all these bloated things in there, but they still work. And even though they're not perfect, they're 80%, and 80% is all you need to move forward.
Mm, yeah, totally. I mean, in my very early on in my career, I think I had to develop a sense of, how do I even phrase what it is that I want to know into my Google search. And then when I found the relevant Stack Overflow article, I had to pretty quickly learn that the accepted answer isn't always the correct answer. Like, it's sometimes true, but most of the time, I normally scroll about, two or three in, and then I get to be able to compare what those three people are saying and then look at the comments to where one of the things that kind of worries me about GitHub Copilot Chat or just using these LLMs is it's kind of like Moses on Mount Sinai. Like it has this like authority to it where it gives you an answer, and it's, I won't say you kind of miss that, but being able to get like the context behind why it is answering the way it is, asking it for references, that's something that I don't think comes naturally to a lot of people. That might be something that, maybe there needs to be like a GitHub Copilot 101 class that gets taught in every university where it's like, all
Right.
right, this is how to ask it a question. This is how to ask it, can you show me your sources? Can you like explain to me? I recently used it to be able to. I just had a very simple example. I wanted to do some stuff in C sharp, and I wanted it to evaluate the use of like I collection or I enumerable or I list. And I was like, all right, what's the differences between those? What are the performance implications of that? But I, as the person asking the question, had to have some frame of
Correct.
reference to be able to
Yeah.
know that like I just can't trust the answer that comes out of it. So I'm curious, have you started using, some of these tools outside of like GitHub Copilot, like ChatGPT? Like what's your usage been in the past? Oh man, I think GitHub or
A year.
ChatGPT just had it just had a year birthday not too long ago.
At least the current version that people know
Hmm.
of. But yeah. Um, yeah, I'd say from the university perspective, I've definitely used it for things like writing boilerplate contract stuff. So like writing grants, right? I'm all about writing pitches and explaining to you why I want to do something, but there's a bunch of just filler wording that has to be used in these applications. And that's where GPTs are great because they've, read a million versions of that boilerplate text. So it's really good at filling in those gaps. Um, so using it for like grant writing's been awesome. Using it to help you structure a class is pretty good because it has 100 years of knowledge on how successful university and high school courses have been designed. And again, it's going to have gaps, but like if you're kind of lost, it's a great place to start to develop coursework as well. And then of course, this isn't me using it, but I straight up tell my students they should use this, right? Like use my class as an excuse to give this a run. Um, because whether it's fair or not, whether it's, philosophically aligned with your views or not, it exists and it's going to be used and you will fall behind if you don't use it, is kind of what I try to explain to them. And then as far as development goes for, VR development for my company, probably our main use case, and it's not that amazing, is the image generation for concept art generation, right? Now, I want to make a comment that the concept art that we generate, we're not like publicly showing off and saying, look at our concept art, right? Because I think that's where you get into trouble. But when we're stuck on like, hey, we know we have these limitations building for a mobile processor. We know we have these things. We know we can do this. We know we like this style from this game, this artist, etc. It's really nice to be able to mix all those words together into a GPT or DALL-E or Stable Diffusion and have it pop out just gross images. I mean, they're geometric, like random, but the colors and shapes and shading that it shows has helped us develop an art style with our limitations, which has been awesome. I'd say we use it a little bit on the coding side, but mostly to do the stuff you were mentioning, where we're asking it questions that we only know to ask because we're so deep into the code, right? Like we were trying to do essentially what blockchain does, but for a mesh. And we're like, this has to exist, right? But we didn't know how to explain it. Turns out there's a research paper that came out 3 years ago on the exact thing we were talking about, and it has a name. We just didn't know the name. But GPT helped us get to that name. So stuff like that has been super useful as far as development goes. I would say that as developers go, our skill is kind of in that level where we aren't using it to write code as much. Um, there's like, if you're a newbie developer, it can mess you up. If you're kind of in the middle range developer, I think that's where GPT is rocket fuel. And then once you level up to the high end developer, you kind of stop using it as much again for coding anyway, uh, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, and that echoes what I've heard from other participants at this webcast. If you're already a great developer, you don't like it's funny, like the more mature you get in your development process, ultimately the less code you end up writing because like, all right, I could do all these like really fancy patterns that I learned about in school. I could do all
Mhm.
these really like clever tricks. But at the end of the day, normally those are going to be more complex than what you actually need. And you might even over engineer solutions to problems to where just after a lot of trial and error, mostly error, you kind of know like what you want to do. And
Mhm.
so it's not as much of a guessing game anymore. Like you already know what you want. Code generation for like model classes or just classes that represent data moving back and forth, I have actually found that to be kind of nice to use GitHub Copilot because it's like, all right, I could do, like public string property one, public date time nullable property, or I could just say like, all right, I want a class in C sharp called this. It's going to have these properties. These are the types. Go, and then it just pops it out for me. Like that's
Boom.
been kind of nice. Like
Yeah,
that's
it's like souped up pseudocode.
yeah, like on the aggregate, I think that can save, an enormous amount of time. And like
Absolutely.
so for high end, like very senior developers, I agree. I don't see like a ton of use cases for it. But what it would hopefully do is it would take those entry level and those mid level developers and maybe raise their skill levels a bit more. So where I don't foresee it taking away jobs. If anything, I see it allowing developers to be more productive with the limited hours, the 24 hours in the day that the good Lord has seen fit to give us. Like
Hmm.
it's a perennial complaint from every single project I've ever been on. We need to do this faster. We need to do this faster. We need to do this faster. So if there's a way to maybe make us like 2 to 3% more effective using some of these tools to synthesize data together, to be able to just generate code, like that might give us some of the savings that we need to where like at the end of the day, it's just another tool, that we have in our tool belt, just like anything else that we have.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. 100%.
Good, good. Some of the things that I've kind of written down as you were talking, image generation, I do really like. I don't have an artistic bone in my body, and Photoshop, I'm just like programmers, like we're very literal, like if else statements, like that's how we operate. But
Yeah.
being able to have a tool that I could describe what I want, and at least it gets me 60% of the way there, like that's been awesome.
Hmm.
Boilerplate, I've actually seen some really interesting tooling on the government contracting side. One of the big complaints, and I'm sure you can feel this too from having to do grant writing, is like there's so much text that you just have to include in a lot of these, and
Yeah.
being able to quickly churn out and effectively churn out RFIs and RFP responses in the DoD space. Ask Sage is actually a company that I ran across where like that's their model is they will give you like you can describe what you want and it will give you like a template to where you still have to fill in pieces of it, but it accelerates your process so much quicker than having to write a lot of this stuff yourself.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious, you kind of touched a little bit about it when you're talking about your company for, like spatial computing. Like what are some of the other areas that excite you? It can even be outside of generative AI. Like what are the things that you are most looking forward to in 2024 and the years to come? As it relates to just like the Apple Vision glasses. Like those just sold out in like what like less than like an hour or something. This is nuts.
Right. Right. So those were designed to sell out. Apple's very good at marketing, and I think the headset is the best piece of VR, AR, spatial computing hardware on the market. But don't be confused. It's marketing that Apple is winning at the moment. But that's a win for the industry, right? You're getting a bunch of people who had no use for VR, AR, whatever, who now, because Apple's doing it, the door is open in their mind. They have permission. It's cool now, right? So that's very good for the industry. I'm super excited for that. As far as like my more, cynical, I've been working in this space for 10 years hat goes, that headset would have been amazing if it came out in 2018. But that's what Apple does, right? I mean, they aren't ever first to the party. Smartphones existed since the late 90s, right? They just tend to do things better in a design wise. That said, I don't think the Vision Pro is as much of a leap in UX as like the iPhone was when it came out, right? Because it took a bunch of existing tech and made the UX like, 5 to 10x better than what it was. The Vision Pro is maybe 2x, probably more like between 5 and 60% improvement, which is still significant as far as an iteration of a piece of hardware goes, but it's not your previous Apple, like, whoa, look, here's Apple. So yeah, that's kind of all I can say on the Apple side. But as far as the industry itself, this is a nice little kind of like warming back up of one of the the VR winters that we have every few years. This is a nice the season's warming back up because we have this big player involved and people are seeing the opportunities again. Um, One of the things that I'm most excited about, I wouldn't say necessarily for this year because I don't think it's going to be that fast, but VR and AI and education is probably the thing that I'm most passionate about long term. It's actually what I hope my company will do one day. Um, but there's no reason that a classroom of 30 kids should all be trying to be taught the same thing at the same speed, right? They should all be in their own spatial computing devices with a coordinator there that's, keeping them involved in reality and making sure that there's real world activities to keep, the human connections alive. but at least half of their day should be spent in, VR, learning what they want to learn at their pace, just enhanced by AI that can go and grab information from anywhere in the world instantly for them. So, if you're interested in sailing, but you hate math and science, well, what if I start talking about buoyancy of your sailboat and the wind and the pressure, low pressure zone around the sail? All of a sudden I'm teaching you math and science, but I'm only teaching you sailing, right? This is the kind of stuff that AI, I think, is just going to destroy our current education system
Mhm. That's
in a good
interesting.
way.
I haven't heard it sort of phrased like that, where it could disrupt and like be able to tailor the education to like whatever the interests are. I mean, I have a 9-year-old and 6-year-old daughter. Like, if they were to be taught, about like math in terms of baking, like they would love that, or math in terms of like, I don't know, how quickly you can get your parents to wake up on a Saturday morning because they hear you screaming, like
Yeah.
that kind of like way of like absorbing information, like very bespoke, very tailored to the person that you're talking to. I don't
Mhm.
know. That would make me want to learn personally.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you can do it today, right? It's just you have to do the curation as the parent and as a programmer who understands that it's going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But that part I think can be solved. Um, and I actually did an experiment earlier last year. I made an app that essentially you say like what your education level is, what you're interested in, and what you want to like what your goal is, and it would GPT its way through Google and give you like 20 Google responses that were highly curated based on like Google searches that the GPT was generating based on all the information. So like if I said I was, a high school student interested in game development and VR and I liked sports, it would look up tutorials on YouTube of like how to make a football that throws in VR and how to make your first VR project or how to learn C sharp, right? It would be all these different answers. So that was like my first version of like what I think this system could do. Um, yeah, I think there's just so much opportunity there for sure. And
No.
it's like I said, it's already possible today. It's just kind of wrapping it in a facilitator safe wrapping, right? Like that's what's kind of stopped the VR from working in the classrooms is there's not a lot of software solutions out there to make sure everyone in the room is seeing the same thing at the same time and being able to click a button and put them into pass through and get them out of VR at the, behest of the teacher, right? Because like a savvy student could put on the VR headset in a class and they're going to be playing Beat Saber in no time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Or Minecraft, if it was
right,
me. But
exactly.
that's for a podcast for a different day.
Right.
So no, you've covered a lot of ground. You've given me some things that I honestly hadn't really thought about before. So I'm curious, like any closing thoughts in terms of like where your head's at in terms of the things that you're really excited about. Anything else that we haven't talked about that that bears mentioning. Like what gets you jazzed when you think about generative AI that we haven't talked
Uh,
about yet.
what gets me jazzed is like the disruption that it's causing. And as much as, I don't want people to be in pain, it is a little bit of Schadenfreude of people being so scared about it. Because like it's the same thing when digital music came out, it's the same thing when Photoshop came out. Yeah, I mean, it's just it happens. It's like you'd think people alive in these generations would be so used to change that we would stop being so scared of stuff like this. But philosophically, I find the conversations are like, it's stealing ideas, right? Um, but an AI works no differently than a human, right? Like any idea you ever have is based on things that you've absorbed from reality, right? Every artist has been inspired, no matter how far ago and how deep in their subconscious, by the things that they've seen in their own life. So like asking an AI to like not use copyrighted material is like equivalent to asking an artist to be born with a blindfold on. It doesn't make sense. Like um, and it's not to say that people shouldn't be paid for their work and all that, but it's interesting to me how it's okay if an artist does it, but once a robot does it, it becomes a problem, right? And I mean, this is getting way out there, but like now we're talking about AI rights and stuff. I mean, there's like a whole mess of things that we're going to be stepping into the next few years that are just really cool to like. I don't really have a bone in the fight, but it's really awesome to see. And these tools, I think, are so powerful that it is going to cause disruption. I don't think as many the job loss is going to be as big as people think. I think it's going to be kind of what you were saying, right? You're not going to replace a programmer. You're going to enhance your programmers because businesses want to make money, you know? It's just what it is. So I'm super excited about it. And, I'd say my level of fear is like 2%, but my level of optimism is like 98.
Good. That's a good place to be at. It'll be interesting too. Like we're recording this in January 2024. There's a few court cases that are going on right now. New York Times v. OpenAI, as far as can a LLM be trained on copyrighted data without giving some money back to the person that created the copyright. There was actually a lawsuit in, I believe, the UK where an LLM was named as an author on a patent because it had sort of synthesized information from multiple different sources, and it was. I think there were human authors on that patent, but then there was also the, like, I don't remember
Who
which one they
also,
used.
the humans were also synthesizing
Yeah,
information, right?
yes, that's very true. And the judge on that ruled that because an LLM is not a person, it cannot be named as an author on a copyright. Which, I mean, I guess that's correct. It was the judge didn't weigh on whether it should or shouldn't, but it was more like like this is only for people. Like the certain amount of AI rights. That's just it's always interesting to see from like a legal like legislative standpoint how far we outpace them sometimes and how hard it is to keep up with the pace of the innovation that we provide.
Yep. Yeah,
So if people want to learn more about you, Michael, about your company, where should they go? Where should they look at? Are you on Instagram? Are you on Pinterest? Where are you at? You're on MySpace,
but
out of curiosity.
yeah, I was. I probably still have the page out there somewhere.
Me too.
So yeah, I think the best place is always just LinkedIn. It's a fairly good place to connect with me. It's basically my address book. And then, of course, if you want to learn more about what we're building at VRdojo, there's vrdojo.games. And then if you're interested in VR in the Kansas City or Midwest area and you happen to be around Kansas City, UMKC has an awesome VR lab in our innovation studio. So if you just search UMKC Innovation Studio, or again, connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll find it and you can come tour and play with all of our fancy schmancy VR toys.
Mm-hmm. No, look forward to it. Well, Michael, thank you very much for the time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, as always
Yeah,
do.
thank you.
And we'll see you all in the future.